All right, Nick, let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons looking really strong. I think the team is looking very different than they were at the beginning of last season. I'm pretty excited about what the Falcons going on. As we've gotten through the draft, undrafted free agency, we've gotten through everything in this offseason. We're starting to hear what coaches are saying, what people are saying about young players on this team, and what is there to get excited about. I think there's one young player in particular who there's a lot to be excited about. I think he can add some value to this team and seems like a big time steal for the Falcons. We'll get into that in just a second here, but first, I'm Andrew. That's Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I alluded to, one guy in particular looking really like a potential steal for the Falcons, a guy that can add some value to this team, one position in particular, and that's the tight end position with undrafted free agent Joshua Simon out of the University of South Carolina. Let's get into the article and we'll talk more about some stats and comparisons on the other side. This is from over on SI.com. It says, Falcons tight end coach Kevin Koger told Atlanta Falcons on SI he was surprised Simon went undrafted, saying, I thought the world of Josh, Koger said Wednesday. You watch the guy's tape, he's a guy that's about 6'5", 240. He ran a 4.6, long arms. You look at all those things, you're like, okay, in terms of height, weight, speed, he's a guy that matches up comparatively to guys in the NFL, man. That's definitely a guy you want in your room, Kroger said. That you're able to bring in and develop and mold into a player that could potentially be special. He's an athlete, and that's why he had a good college career, Koger said. You turn on his tape and you're like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. We brought him in here. You see a great job by our front office identifying him, bringing him in, and getting that deal. So I think Koger brings up some really important stuff here. He says this is a guy that you can bring in, you can mold, and he can become something special. And when you think of the tight end position, the Falcons have had plans in the past to make it a special position. Obviously, they drafted Kyle Pitts in the first round a few years ago to be something special. But if we're being honest, he hasn't really turned out to be what he was supposed to be. His first year was pretty good. He had great yards, over 1,000 yards receiving, but he only had one touchdown. Then it got progressively worse year after year after year, whether it's poor production or injury. He just never really got it done for being picked so high. So I think bringing in a guy like Simon here can be really interesting. And if we compare and it's kind of hard to compare these, so I picked some stats that I think are comparable. When you compare what Kyle Pitts was able to do in the offense or how they used him last year versus how Joshua Simon was used last year at South Carolina, I think there's a lot of good comparisons here. Let's bring up this first chart. This shows on the left here, the first thing, yards after catch per reception, and it just shows Simon is a guy who, when you give him the ball, he can have a little bit of wiggle, he can make guys miss, and he can get some extra yards after catch. 8.7 yards after catch per reception compared to Kyle Pitts' 5.8 yards after catch per reception. You look in the touchdown department, if they need to use him in the red zone, can he go up being that big frame that both him and Kyle Pitts are pretty much the same height? You look at what he can do in the red zone. Is he a touchdown magnet? Yes, he is. 7 touchdowns last year. And you got to remember, significantly less games in college than in the NFL, where Kyle Pitts, 4 touchdowns here. First downs. Can he do the dirty work? Can he get the first down for you when it counts? Yes, he could. 24 first downs compared to Kyle Pitts' 21 first downs. Then, and volume. How much volume was this guy getting in college? He had 40 receptions last year. Kyle Pitts had about 47 receptions last year with the Atlanta Falcons. And again, more games than was played in college. So this is a guy who can handle the volume that they tried to run through Kyle Pitts. I think he did a better job. We're talking college to pro. It doesn't really match up. But I think when you look at what he did, I think he can handle what they were giving Kyle Pitts, because that's the key here. I think Kyle Pitts has been falling off, and when you have a guy that's an undrafted free agent who walks into the room and has the potential to match up with your first-round draft pick, that's when things you have to say, okay, this makes sense. Bringing in a guy like this is a steal. We don't need to pay Kyle Pitts, the first-round salary that we're going to have to move on from him eventually. Hasn't really lived up to what he needs to be. Simon is a guy that can do that, and just more comparison Talk about what exactly they're looking for. Athletic freak at the tight end position. Compare their RAS scores. Very similar. 8.65 to for Simon here, 9.66 for Pitts. Obviously, Pitts is better. He was a first round pick. But when you're looking at an undrafted free agent and they match up almost very similarly, 240 to 245 in the weight, 6'4 to 6'5 in height, guys that are ran good 40s, a 4.6 versus a 4.44. I mean, these guys are very similar on paper, especially for where they were drafted. This is a guy in Simon who I think can come in and do a lot of good work for the Falcons. So good job by them identifying this undrafted free agent. It seems the tight end coach is very excited about what he can bring to this team. And I think this is a guy that can work himself in to be the next big receiving threat for the Falcons if everything works out as planned. Curious what your thoughts are on this one, Nick. But before we get to you, Falcons fans, in the comment section below, let's talk about Kyle Pitts just for a second here. I want to know, what are your honest thoughts on Pitts? Is this a guy who he's a bust? You need to move on from him. Everyone's at this point said, hey, it's been 4 seasons. We've seen what he can do. We need to get out from under this. Let's just move on, cut him, whatever the deal is going to be after this season, and just go our separate ways. Or is this a guy that you think, okay, maybe this is the year? Maybe he breaks out somehow this year. I want to hear the thoughts of both sides because I'm just curious what you think about Kyle Pitts as a player in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about this latest for the Falcons?
Yeah, so Simon is a very interesting prospect. He played 6 years of collegiate football, obviously having that COVID year in 2020, plus the regular redshirt years. You have eligibility thrown completely out of whack. We're seeing guys with 5, 6 years of eligibility, and Simon is, of course, one of those guys. And when you have that kind of experience, we see what happens with prospects. They develop towards the end of their collegiate careers into the kind of player they were always meant to be. We see this happen sometimes in the NFL going back a number of years. Guys would be late round picks that go undrafted. Then a year or two in the NFL, they'd hit that magical 23, 24, and then they became what they were actually going to be. They hit their, I don't want to say their maximum, but they matured into who they physically need to be as football players. With the COVID year, we're seeing that happen with some collegiate guys. And I think Simon's a great example of that. He kind of emerged, certainly the second half of last year for South Carolina, as a legitimate receiving threat. He is a willing blocker, lacks the frame to be an elite blocker. He basically is Kyle Pitts. He's a poor man's Kyle Pitts the second half of last season for South Carolina, if you look at what Kyle Pitts was collegiately with the Florida Gators. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Pitts, of course, is in the last year of his deal. When you talk about replacing his production, it really isn't a whole lot. You brought it up there on the screen a few slides ago. Not a lot of receptions, not an incredible amount of receiving yards, really a lot of just kind of like not what we expected out of such a high value prospect with such physical tools. If you're the Atlanta Falcons and you're just looking to replace that production, replace that role in the offense, the tight end that can line up all over the place with a great set of athletic skills, a little yards after catch, Simon as an undrafted free agent is the ultimate dirt cheap alternative, right? He is a guy that got progressively better throughout his collegiate career. Like I said, he's matured into who he is as a player. He is very stylistically similar. You talked about their measurables a few minutes ago between him and Pitts. So you talk about a guy, if he can pick up the offense, which by all indications he will, he could slide perfectly into that Kyle Pitts role next season or this season if he plays better than Pitts or if Pitts gets hurt or something like that. And I think that's what the Falcons realize here. They want Kyle Pitts to succeed. I want Kyle Pitts to succeed. I think everybody wants Kyle Pitts to do great. I don't think anyone's rooting against Kyle Pitts, but at this point, we all have to be honest with ourselves. He kind of is who he is as an Atlanta Falcons playmaker, and it's just not worth the dollars, right? His salary cap hit this year is going to be almost 11 million bucks. Bringing him back would probably cost you a very similar number. It just doesn't make sense for the production you're getting on the field. He's not the game-changing weapon everyone thought he would be, or at least at times looked like he could be his rookie season. I think if you're just looking for a solid receiving option and a willing blocker, a team-first guy who's a grown-up, he's done a lot of things we always talk about on this channel, guys who are mature, they transfer in their collegiate careers and improve. That's always a sign that they're ready to take that next big leap. It's hard in college, right? You're in one place for a number of years. You transfer to a completely different school, new teachers, new friends, new teammates, new coaches across the board, and you go through that change. You adapt to become an even better player. That's a sign that you can do that in the National Football League. I'll admit it's much harder to go from, college to college than it is to go from college to the National Football League. That jump to the National Football League is very, very hard. But the reality is you've done a mini form of that before in the past. A lot of guys haven't. You know how to handle yourself. You're a grown up. You've been through this process before. I look at a guy like Simon who can come in and very quickly get brought up to speed, understand this offense, and fill that Kyle Pitts role. He's a guy that preseason is going to be absolutely huge because if he starts doing some good things with the second string and third string as we get through training camp for the preseason, I guarantee this Falcons leadership, this coaching staff, the front office, they're already going to earmark for 2026 saying, all right, Pitts is gone. Simon is the new Pitts in this offense. And who knows, it could happen sooner rather than later, depending how Kyle Pitts looks. Of course, with Michael Penix Jr. heading into the critical year 2 of his situation. He obviously is an older rookie as well. So we're seeing the Atlanta Falcons really dive deep into the older rookie approach. Again, we have to wait and see. It's early, all the caveats that apply this time of year. But when we see young players, especially unheralded, undrafted rookies, garner some praise, garner some attention, especially when it's at a position right now with the Atlanta Falcons receiving tight end, where there's a lot of question marks, pay attention to that. This is how breakout guys happen. This is how the Victor Cruzes of the world, remember him with the New York Giants, kind of came out of nowhere. Very similar kind of situation way back when. A lot of football has to be played, but I think it's clear at this point, Simon is off to a great start, and he has a great opportunity in front of him.
Yeah, Nick, and I think just a couple other things you talk about fitting in, and that's the key here. This is, for lack of a better term, I know it doesn't really exude confidence when you say it like this. This is a poor man's Kyle Pitts. This is an undrafted free agent who's going to be brought in to fill the role of a first round draft pick. This is a guy who's going to be able to be at Kyle Pitts' worst easily. So I think,
and just to not to cut you off there, Miles, but when we say poor man's Kyle Pitts, we also mean for like 5% of the cost.
oh yeah,
Right.
that's undrafted free agent versus a first round pick. Like you're talking about millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars versus veteran minimum salary, like or no, rookie minimum salary. This is very, very, very inexpensive. And I think when you look around this tight end room for the Falcons, it shows this is the route that they're wanting to go. Because look at the other guys they have. They kept Charlie Warner. That's a guy that's back. They go in and they get Quitoriano. Again, two guys that are mainly known blocking tight ends, guys that aren't really, lighting it up in the receiving game. Those are your blocking tight ends. A guy like Simon, come in, be a guy that could be a receiving threat. So work that out, figure it out. Try to get all of that under wraps and then figure out, can Simon be that guy? It looks like he can be. All the stats say he can be. All of his athletic abilities say that he should be able to. His tight ends coach saying he should be. So by all accounts, I think Joshua Simon can be that guy. He can be Kyle Pitts for what Kyle Pitts has been, at least for the last couple of years, extremely cheap. Not even a fraction of the cost of Kyle Pitts. So you're able to move off of Pitts, keep this offense moving in the right direction. And, that's at worst. I think at worst, that's what Simon's able to become. Maybe he becomes better than that. Maybe he becomes something special. I mean, he does have all the athletic tools. Maybe he develops and becomes superstar. Who knows? But at worst, you get out from under that first round draft pick, kind of salary that Pitts entails. You're able to bring in an undrafted free agent for basically nothing for the next couple of years and have him fill that role. I think this is a win-win for the Falcons no matter how it works out. I really think this is going to be a steal when we look all back and you see how this season unfolded. Saying Simon, that was a great pickup, able to do a lot of good things for the Falcons.